I'll start again with a microphone on. Welcome to tonight's live stream. My name's Les, and I am the producer of tonight's show for Truth Proof, Paul Sinclair. So, we've got a great guest on tonight. Without further ado, I'll just go through a few people whose names have just popped up in the chat, and I've got to thank everybody for joining us tonight on the show. Great show, great guest. And let's have a look who's in the chat tonight. Right, we have Newsy Brown and Steve T, Jessica Pym. Welcome, Jessica. And also at this point, I am going to say that Deborah Singleton is doing the moderating tonight. She does a great job. Welcome back, Debs. And it was a great show last week, by the way. And you got some great comments. So let's have a look. We have... let's find some new names coming up here. I'm just scrolling down. Joe Weeks. We have Paul Sinclair in the chat. Welcome, Paul. And we have Mark Rhodes. I know. Let's have a look. Alex Wingfield is on the chat tonight. Let's see what else is in. Mary Bovey Williams. Patricia Adams Wright. Welcome all to tonight's show. Anyway, without further ado, without me babbling on, let's get on with tonight's show. So I've just got to say one thing, guys. Thanks for all the super chats that we've had in recent weeks. And yeah, great support. We thank you very much. So don't forget to share this video after the stream's finished. Share it now as the stream's going along. A like, subscribe, and all that jazz. Without further ado, though, we're going to bring on Paul and his guest. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Les. Another week soon comes round, and tonight we've got an absolutely brilliant guest. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Barry Fitzgerald, and anybody who's researched him or knows of him or does afterwards, you'll see the amount of work that this bloke's done in the unexplained phenomena, supernatural, mythology, everything, you name it. Barry's looked into it, and not just skimmed surface, it's deep research. Barry, welcome to Truth Proof.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm honored that you asked me to come on. And I have to say I've been an admirer of your work for quite some time, and I see the similarities between your work and what I'm experiencing here on the island of Ireland.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I was amazed when I started reading about what you'd been investigating. I mean, I know that you've done work with Steve Mera, and you'll probably touch on that later on in show or at some point whenever you feel ready to do that. But you will just kick it off in whatever direction you want. Basically, when did your interest start in the field of paranormal and the supernatural? I mean, there's that many elements that you've looked into. I would have said multi-phenomena research.
It really is multi-phenomena. And I think my initial steps into this would have been as a child, growing up in a house that was known to be haunted, and having my own experiences in that property. So having that, and of course then there was the natural curiosity of a child, and part of that I blame on my father, because he sat me down in front of episodes of Doctor Who and Star Trek, and I was just mesmerized by sci-fi, which really promoted those questions. Although, in fairness, looking back at my father, it was probably just a way of getting me to shut up as a kid. But growing from that and really developing this interest, this what we call on the island, this craw for more knowledge and understanding. And I come from a heritage of people on this island who have a real connection to the land, and that's something we never lost. And I really do value that. And living here in the west coast of Ireland, we are open to a lot of this phenomena, folklore, mythology, and things like that, especially here in the West Coast. But we also have access to a lot of our natural history and heritage. You know, we've got access here to passage chambers that predate the Great Pyramids of Giza, and we can access those 24/7, 365 days a year. We're not limited like those like our counterparts in the US who have to be out of the national parks an hour after sunset, which I find is very, very unfair.
Yeah, strange, isn't it? Yeah.
So we're not limited that way, and we don't have the same type of destruction and things like that would happen in other locations, like in mainland Europe and things like that. So you know, there's a deep respect here that I really hone into and welcome, and it certainly has helped promote a lot of the books.
You know, you touched on that, the fact that, you know, you're still very much in touch with the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I won't say just in the UK, but in many countries around the world, that's what we've lost touch with, Barry. And the ancient people, should we say, or the people of the past, not too distant past, they were more in tune with it, as you know, and they looked upon the things that you know are real, I know are real, and a lot of people within the chat who will listen to this afterwards, they didn't have to question it and sort of, everybody, you've got to look at things with a scientific eye, but they didn't question it and just say, no, this can't be because we can't understand it. It's, you know, the past, that's where all the clues are. Very much so.
And, you know, I have access to a lot of the old files. And Ireland, we take pride in that our folklore and mythology is all now digitized and can be accessed all over the world to anyone free. And so we're able to see, and those people who are working within the fringe fields are able to tap into these and see what was happening here. What common factors were our ancestors having that we can relate to today? I'll give you an instance. There was this craft that was seen over 120 years ago, a long cylinder object with windows along the middle and white people sitting inside, and it landed in a large lock and lifted up and then entered straight into an old ring fort and vanished. Now, whenever it hit the water, it was producing a lot of steam. Now, the people could only identify this by common factors in which they understood of the day, and it became known as the ghost train.
Yeah.
Those long cylinder objects we now identify within ufology, and understand the cylinder phenomena that has occurred right up into present day. So you know, we can recognize that now, but before it was completely lost on them, and they had just no idea.
And you did you say that the writings say it disappeared into? Did you say a hill fort? Or did you say?
Yes, the ship itself rose from the water after creating huge amounts of steam, and lifted up into the air, and then punctured. It almost punctured the ground and entered this old ring fort and was gone.
Fort. Yeah. My reasoning is the ring fort. Do you think that the early peoples recognized the land, this particular area, as a place of significance, a place where,
well, the old
strange nature happen?
Yeah, the old ring forts, you see, were old places of habitat for Iron Age man. But subsequently, since there have the story was that there was a lot of gold and things hidden in these places, so people were going and digging them up, and these particular places, they had to come up with some reason to stop the people from the Irish from digging these places up. So they said, these are fairy rings. You do not disturb the fairy ring, otherwise penance of death. So the people suddenly stepped back and went, oh, okay. It wasn't necessarily the fairy ring itself or the ring fort that I think that was gathering attraction to this. There was a souterrain within that ring fort, an entranceway to the underworld.
Okay.
That's, I think, what it was aiming toward. You know, I came across another account maybe 10 years ago, just down the road. And the person was standing in his back kitchen, and he was just taking a glass of water when he noticed these lights passing along the fence. And he said they were exceptionally powerful lights of red, green, and I think there was a purple in there as well. And they were that powerful. He was able to see the lines penetrating through the fence as these things passed, and started scanning this huge ring fort behind. And within the ring fort, we do know that there is a souterrain, again, an entranceway to the underworld. And so this was a common factor for these things. Our passage chambers, all of this stuff were accesses to this other world, this nether world. Call it what you want. It comes in many names, but these things were interested in that. And in particular, I refer to the Irish perspective of fairies. And, you know, I understand that a lot of people will snigger at the idea of Tinkerbell flying around, but to the Irish, the fairies were not Tinkerbell. Traditionally, the elfin kind were large like us. And but their particular kind came from these stone monuments. They come out of those into our reality. So what were these places of old? You know, it was a for me, being on top of a mountain and witnessing these people disappearing within the passage chambers was phenomenal for me. And I was able to get a photograph of them just before they vanished. And as I say, they were just like you and me.
Well, that's what. Yeah, you've just answered it. Oh, yeah. You when you say these people or these beings vanishing, you mean what people in Ireland would call the fairies?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And are they looked upon as good or bad, or is have we got different factors?
Yeah, they can be troublesome, like all of the phenomena, right across the board. And this is something I'll get into during our discussion, because I see this all as the same phenomena throughout all of the fringe research fields, but just different masks.
Yeah.
Now, do we apply the mask, or do they apply the mask? I think there's a bit of both going on there.
Now, by that, Barry, do you mean when you say do we apply the mask? Do you mean if, let's, for argument's sake, I decide I'm a nuts and bolts researcher, am I then going to see nuts and bolts type UFO type craft, but it's the same phenomena that's presenting? If I wanted to see cryptids, would I see cryptids? I've maybe got it wrong.
There's what we can do is create archetypes, and that in itself can cause a problem, because that comes with its own weight of obstacles. When we start creating like godheads and all this other stuff, we start creating these, and that can create a problem. It helps this other phenomena weave in through without being noticed. So we have created something it's a stick to break our own back, and they also alter that particular mask. And sometimes it could change several times within a single generation. And the way that I tend to track this phenomenon is not by the way that it appears, but by the way it interacts with us. I track it by the phenomena, not by the way it appears. And by doing that, I have been able to sidestep this problem in which the mask changes and we drive ourselves up against a brick wall and there's nothing beyond it. I've been able to push this back into Mesopotamian timelines. So we've been able to track a lot of the stuff all the way back, which includes what we call today the fairy.
Yeah.
So there is a long history to this phenomena, but it's the way that it interacts with us, and the way that, and I have to use this word, the way that it deceives us. It's very important, because there is a high element of deception.
Yeah, I would believe that, you know, and what you've just talked about, we've got burial mounds here around East and North Yorkshire, and in, I don't know, 1800s and earlier than that, people used to dig them up looking for gold.
Yes.
And some of them have got massive connections to fairies. Willie Howe being one, which you may have heard of, in particular, which is about probably 8 miles from here.
Right.
And there's loads of stories attached to the little beings that are supposed to live within the mound. So what you've just said and ways to discourage people digging the mound could be exactly the same here. I would think it is, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, for us, you see, the Irish have a name for the fairy, and we call them the Sídhe, which is spelled Sidhe.
The Sídhe.
The Sídhe, yeah. And when we start looking at other characters that we know are part of that particular kingdom, such as the Banshee, this creature that appears and cries and wails, and then there's a death that occurs after it. I've had my own experiences with her, but when we translate the word Banshee, ban meaning woman, and then she, we assumed within the modern context was the fairy. That's not quite true. When we add time to that, we see that the she is actually the mounds. It's woman of the mounds.
Right.
And the mounds themselves, predominantly, our mounds are made of stone.
Right.
And I don't know about your mounds. I would imagine they probably are underneath.
The majority are chalk. A lot of them around East and North Yorkshire. Yeah.
And these things come through the rock. And in particular, the designs, the layout of the chambers are exceptionally important, and the direction in which they point. So those mounds, I would assume, probably tally toward either a sunrise or a sunset. And they have direct connections back to Mesopotamia.
Okay.
So their age is much, much older than what we initially thought.
So jumping from that, because unless you want to stay with that, we know that, or I know that you've written a number of books, and the latest book, which is due for publication when, Barry?
March the 1st. Yes, we're expecting that then.
The Deception of Gods and Men.
That's it.
With Brian Allen, co-authored, Brian, has he co-authored the book with you? And do you want to touch on anything within the book?
Well, the book itself, The Deceptions of Gods and Men, is designed to help us understand what is coming through from this other side, and what in its multifaceted forms, actually, we hypothesize what it actually is by looking at what our ancestors have left us behind, the thousands of years of what they have left behind. Because what I find is that in today's society, we're very quick to make an opinion on a phenomena based on our own very short existence within this world.
Yeah.
And ignore the thousands of years of people who have gone before us, their observations, their interactions with the same thing. And because we didn't have that connection, we didn't have that experience, we write it off.
Yeah.
That's a foolish perspective.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, in today's modern society, there's very little regard paid to folklore and these stories of old. And me personally, I sort of really do think that these people were seeing exactly what we're seeing today, and we should be giving these stories, these ancient accounts, a lot of respect. And the book, is it a collection of accounts, or your
actually,
Brian?
What we're doing with the book is we're actually going after the phenomena. We're tracking it. We are hunting the phenomena, and we're tracking it through the ages. And it was an absolute remarkable experience for us to be able to do this. And initially, the book opens with this phenomena that was reported in Italy, where these beings, these giant humans, appeared to people in Italy, and it was about their interaction with this phenomena, and about how they started to, when friendships developed, they started to repeat a story. I call it the broken record, which we see time and time again, all the way back. The same blasted story, just given a couple of little shimmies around. But it was the same thing. And when we start entering into that cycle, that's whenever the alarm bells go in the back of my head and say, wait a minute, we have been here before.
Yep.
Pay attention to what has been told already.
How old is the story from Italy?
In the 1956 it began. Yeah.
So the contact or the interaction began in 1956.
That's correct.
And is it ongoing?
No, it ended. Because they give us this story of two sides, the two warring sides of the same coin. And unfortunately, humanity seems to be caught in the middle. Every time we're caught in the middle because we buy the story hook, line, and sinker. And so the end of the Italian story, seeing the destruction of one side and their retreat into God knows where, and this other side being victorious. But from there, then we're led into this historical path of following that recycled story back into time and start looking at, well, where do these things happen? What about these creatures that we were worshiping in the past? Where did we go to worship them? How did we worship them? What did they look like? What did they tell us? And all of this stuff then starts coming forward, and we start seeing this picture, and we start rolling along there through the historical records and start building this picture to show that what is coming through, what is materializing today in all its forms, is the same thing, time and time and time again.
So how far back have you gone with it?
Well, we can see the traces of this particular phenomena as far back as 68,000 BC in Botswana. And moving forward, we can also see traces of this within 14,000 BC in the likes of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Now, there are particular components that we look for, that we discuss within the book, of why we're looking at these particular places. The connection in particular to serpent worship. That is one huge big key. And of course, then we roll into this and we look at the migration of this particular type of worship that went global, but traveled from the east to the west. And we look at this as it moved through the likes of Iraq and into Syria, Turkey, and then up into Europe, the British Isles, and across into the Americas. So we tend to see this right, as I say, globally around the world. And the phenomena that comes through is the same phenomena both north and south of the hemisphere. It's the same thing that we are dealing with. It's the same thing that the people in New Zealand are dealing with, the Aborigines in Australia, the Zulu in South Africa. It's all the same thing. I got to interview these people whenever I was traveling, and it was absolutely phenomenal to see this. Now, we started to see this more development of the serpentine connection and the feminine aspect, especially in the Greek period around 3,500 BC, or sorry, 6,500 BC with the Oracle of Delphi. And then this migration across and right up into present day, where we have the Island of the Dead here in Ireland, which I have to say was one of the most exhilarating and exceptionally frightening experiences I've ever had in my entire life. Now, I've been doing this, I've been hunting the paranormal and everything else for over 30 years, but that was the one time that I said to my co-author Cormac Strain, I said, Cormac, if I ever come across that again, I'm done. I don't want to know any more about this.
Well, you've opened the door now, Barry, so you've got to tell us about the experience.
Well,
okay, one sec, Barry. I don't know that Les mentioned it at the beginning at show, but any questions, please, in block capitals, and direct them as many as you want for Barry, and we'll do our best to answer them. Right, by the way, Barry.
The Island of the Dead, both Cormac and I were looking into mythology and folklore, and we were writing a book called Legend Seekers. And this was one of these stories that is presented across the table where you go, oh yeah, I've heard of this all before. And you know yourself, you hear many of these stories and you go there and there's nothing. So that's what we pretty much went to do. We expected to go there and find nothing. It was a place of oracle. It was a place where you went to and you were confronted spiritually and physically by this energy that was permeating every essence, every aspect of the island itself. And we had to ask the church permission to go because they still own it. And they said, well, I don't know why you're going there because there's nothing there to find. All the stories are wrong, the maps are wrong, and everything else. But we had maps of the 16th century that were showing details of walls and churches and everything else that was on the island. And when we look at the satellite imagery, we can see clearly that this matches with the 16th century church. So we were wondering, why is he telling us that there's nothing there to find? So we ended up going. And we confirmed everything on the map during the day, but we couldn't get off the island quick enough before the sun started to set. So we just says, oh, we'll stay here and leave in the morning. Big mistake. And the moment that the sun started to set in that place, I have to say the energetical signature of the island altered. It really changed. And I have to say I've been in some places which came close to this, whereas the sun starts to set, you feel the rawness of nature. And it ain't fun anymore. And this place, take that and multiply it by 100. I thought, what on earth is going on? Now I had the dog with me. And the dog stayed in the tent. And the only place that we could stay were these pits on the island. Now the pits were located, according to the mapping system, in the land that belonged to the demons. And the other land on the other side of the island that belonged to the angels was just too high and shrubs and everything else. So
just riveted, but how big's the island? Just give us an idea, please.
It would be a quarter of a mile across.
Right. Okay.
So that was fine. We pitched the tent, and I have to say, these pits that were on the island, no one lives on the island. There's no sheep on the island. There is nothing on the island except birds. And these pits had nothing growing in them. The vegetation didn't grow in the pits. Now, everything else matched the maps from the 16th century. The divide between the demons and the angels was there clearly to see. Yet the pits, nothing grew in the pits. And it was the pits that you went to and you spent the night and you were challenged to the point of death, according to the legend. And we pitched the tent and oh my God. And it started, I love the stars. Well, I used to love the stars and the moon and everything else. So I would be an avid sky watcher at that time. And everything was great. But that night, I never opened the door of the tent. I never went out. As you lay flat on the ground, it felt like a wave just passing through you repeatedly. And that wave caused this anxiety to start to grow. And it got to a point, even the dog, who was a massive animal, crawled underneath my sleeping bag, hiding his head from whatever he was picking up on. Now, what I didn't know was Cormac was in his pit, and he was feeling the same, this thing washing through the tent. And it creates this very unnerving factor. And it was an exceptionally visionary experience on the island. And that's why you went. You went there to have this visionary experience. And I had it, whether I wanted to or not. And people will say that, oh, well, you know, maybe it's a place to go and take ayahuasca or something like that. I assure you, I never even had a cup of tea. And the experience was exceptionally extreme and frightening, to say the least. But what I was shown was this pit, this hole into the ground, into darkness. And as I approached the pit, I could hear serpents, the hiss of serpents. They were exceptionally annoyed that I was going there, that I could see this. But the feeling of fear was so overwhelming. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And by the time morning came, I have to say, I was down, packed. The tent was downloaded and packed and in the boat. And both me and the dog were sitting waiting for an hour before Cormac decided to get us arse back up off the tent and down to the boat. A horrific experience, but it was the experience that I needed to lift me from the railway lines that I was on, researching, and set me in the new track. Because that opened up my paradigm to something completely different.
And obviously, you didn't actually see anything physical. It were an attack on senses and your emotions, weren't it? You know.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Did you tell the people who gave you permissions on mainland on the land that you'd had this experience, or say nothing?
Said nothing. We kept driving.
Yeah. So you wouldn't go back?
Oh, I did.
Oh.
I went back in daylight. I haven't went back at night. I don't want to stay in that place again at night. And I know of another couple of acquaintances of ours that did go and spend the night on the island. And they were planning on spending 2 nights. They spent 1 night and left. They said, never again. And it was a place of oracle. This is where you went to work off your sins. This was also a place you went to commune with what was beyond the veil. And there were reasons that this was happening. This was something that our political elite were using in order to gain power, knowledge, wealth.
By that, do you mean there's other places around the world of a similar ilk that Absolutely. Are being used by the power Absolutely. Elite? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And is that what you're touching on with the serpent worship?
Yes, to a point. You see, with the serpent worship, you need to understand the Nordic perspective of the mounds, because the idea of the mounds themselves were coming from the Fertile Crescent, and the mound builders were coming with them. Now, we do know this for a fact. We know that the people who were in Ireland at that time, because of graves that were uncovered in 2016, they were from the Middle East. We knew that, and it's a very uncomfortable history for us here, because we were always led to believe the Neolithic we didn't really think about where they were coming from and everything else. But these people were bringing the knowledge, of that worship, to this island, and we found some of the remains in County Antrim. And not only that, there were other factors as well that we see this commonality within the ancient Mesopotamian worship and practice of magic. We see it uncover also here on the island within the archaeology and within the habits, the ancient habits of the people at that time.
I think you saw, Les, a few pictures, and there's, I think it was picture number 1, the dwelling or the mound. I don't know whether Les, do you want Les to put that up?
Yeah, that'd be great. That would let people see the mounds that we have. And that particular mound is in County Sligo. That's one of many.
Yeah.
And some of the mounds were orientated to the setting sun. Some of them were orientated to the rising sun on a particular day. And so a lot of the worship that was going on was dedicated to, number 1, the sun, the serpent, and of course there were trigger mechanisms. There were certain chemicals that they were taking, and also vibration was a key factor within the passage chamber. One of the oldest carvings of a Celtic cross is found in a 12th century monastery down the country. Now, what it actually depicts is the layout of a passage chamber.
Right.
The Celtic cross is the passage chamber. This is not something that was given to the Irish by St. Patrick in the 5th century. No, this is something that was on the island thousands of years before. And that particular cross has, on the 3 points at the top of the cross, has a person in there with their mouths open. They're producing song, vibration. And in the center is a spiral that is opening out. And within that spiral opens out to a serpent's head who is consuming the person coming in. The knowledge is being shared at that particular point. So the idea of the sunlight, the orientation, the timing is everything. So this idea of the sunlight at a specific time, at a specific date, and I must say I'm working on a book at the moment called the Fruit of the Gods, which looks at this particular chemical that we believe they were taking, falls on the summer solstice, the day that the sun enters the chambers.
Yeah.
So it all ties in.
And the chemical, I mean, that you think these people were taking, it's not just a drug as some people would use drugs for recreational use now. This was a way of entering the other realm. Is that what you're saying?
It was, yes, very, very much so. And you see, to commune with these things that were coming through, you had your oracle, which was the feminine. Now, of course, that came under attack over the last 2,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years. But it was the female that was the intermediary between the veil and us. Now, what was coming through the veil and what was whispering the knowledge was often depicted as a serpent. Now, to understand the iconography of the serpent, we have to understand the island of the dead. That's exactly what it was. Because from the Nordic traditions, who inherited those from the Middle East, the dead were brought to an island. They were left at the island, on the shore of the island. And when the soul left the body, not the spirit, and this is something I wanted to address because in the modern sense, we find this terminology of soul and spirit very interchangeable. It was never meant to be. That's a mistake on our part. The spirit is gone. The moment you die, boom, it's gone. But the soul lingered. The body was brought to the island of the dead. The soul contained the memories of what that life was lived. And the moment it left the body to go to this place, to these doorways, to the other world, they went through a process of metempsychosis. They went through a change. And the soul of the human altered to a serpent. And it passed through and entered this other world, the place of the souls. And we know what that place is like because of modern work that was done within the paranormal world, especially the skull experiments. Yeah. They were very poignant, and there was a lot of information there, and there was also a lot of deceit, I find, within what was coming through. But we were able to slice and dice at that and see a common factor between what these beings, we'll call them beings for now, were coming through with, and how we see this similarity also within the Norse traditions.
Why do you think there's so much deceit, Barry? Is it because they don't want us to have the knowledge?
No, we can have the knowledge, but the problem is, to understand the deceit, we have to understand us. We have to understand our makeup. And from that perspective, we are a trinity of our own making. What I mean by that is that, as I indicated before, the soul and the spirit are two separate pieces, and the body is the third. The soul's purpose is to keep the body alive as long as possible so that the spirit can take what it learns and goes. Now, the problem being that, and we see this right across the board from research from America, from research in England, and also the Norse, the ancient Norse traditions, we see that when the soul goes back to where it comes from, it is a world, it is a place of absolute nothing. And I mean nothing. No lights, no dark, nothing. Now, when we come along and we start opening doorways, the souls start coming back and they start attaching to people. And when we end up in a situation where we're walking down the street or we're in a group investigating a haunted house, we can end up in a situation where we can open that doorway and these things can leak through. There were astral works, scientific papers that were done on astral projection, and they reported that there were things coming from that darkness because they were attaching to them, the researchers, and they were bringing them back to here. Mm. There is nothing on the other side. It is no wonder they want to come back. But for them to come back and for them to latch on to us and for us to accept them, they tell us a lie.
Yeah.
And when we bite the lie and we swallow the lie, our defenses go down. And that creates a problem. So especially when you consider a teenager who's going through the change and into adulthood, they can attract a lot of these things. And when you have a balance within your own system between your own soul, your spirit, and your body, you are an exceptionally powerful unit. In fact, there are papers within, there are tablets within the Mesopotamian period which state that when you have balance, even the devils themselves are afraid of you. But when you end up in a situation where you have 1, 2, or even 5 of these things trying to latch on, that can create a huge imbalance.
Yeah.
As each one tries to imbue its own personality onto the person, and that creates a serious problem.
Really interesting, seriously. And I hope our listeners have found it as interesting. Any questions, Les?
Yes, great show tonight, guys, up to now, and great information there, Barry, thanks. Yeah, great research. I've got a question from Blue Shift. We've got some good questions in tonight, so let's see if I can plough through some of these. Blue Shift is asking, it's a question for Barry. These resonant chambers, Barry, cymatics shows, or cymatics, I probably pronounced that wrong, shows that the frequency. So have you come across drawings on stones near to these sites that show the key symbols like an instruction manual?
Yes, we have, and carvings from 3,500 years ago within the chambers themselves show the same frequencies that we're seeing in cymatics. And in particular, there was the Princeton University from the US came to Ireland, and they'd done tests on our passage chambers, and the majority of the passage chambers in Ireland are all tuned to 110 hertz. Now, how they were able to do that, I do not know. Maybe if you have a bowl of water, and on the surface of the water, you can create that ripple through vibration. That's maybe how they were able to do this. I don't know. But yes, the frequency of many of the chambers resonates at 110 hertz. Very, very low frequency.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, anything you want to add there?
Well, I'm just, Barry saying that, how they do that, I don't know. And it kind of tells you that the knowledge that was there thousands of years ago, it's that somehow dissipated in mists of time. I don't know. With people there.
Very, very much so, and especially when we understand as well the frequencies that were needed, the light frequencies that were required as well, because these things didn't activate until the sun was just about to set. That's when the frequency was at its purest, because our atmosphere filters out all the other frequencies. And as the sun starts to dip down behind the horizon, that's when we get the purest light to enter the chamber. And that's when the process begins.
All right.
Right, I've got another question from Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer. Andy is asking, what is the scariest paranormal event Barry has experienced? I think you touched on that earlier with your other experiences, Barry, but fire away.
The Island of the Dead definitely is one that was up there. And I have to say, you know, I've done many haunted houses and everything else, and trying to understand what was coming through and everything else. But the experiences that I had when I shifted my investigative outlook to look at the mythology and folklore of our land, I have had more experiences there in that than I've had running around the world looking for ghosts and haunted houses. It was phenomenal about what is actually happening on the land, and we are the ones who've become so disconnected from it. It's not the other way around. We're the ones, we don't walk to shops anymore. We get into a car and we drive. And for anybody who does walk, they put earbuds into their ears, cuts them off from what's going on around them. To get back into nature and make that connection it really is a really wonderful experience to connect back to that. And there are places that I can go to here in Ireland, which are high up in the edges of cliffs and everything else. And there you feel that energy that our ancestors were talking about. And for the Irish, we call that bua. And the energy, that's what it was called, bua. And that was a very powerful energy, and that's I think what a lot of them were tapping into.
It's just, these energies have never gone away. It's just
No.
it's just us, as our culture's just changed, hasn't it? You know.
That's right.
Yeah, I've got great answers there, guys. Another question from I Film UFOs, and welcome to the show, I Film UFOs. Hi Barry, has any light phenomena been seen around these mounds?
Yes. Light phenomena and cryptids, the lot has been seen there. In fact, I was interviewing a person 2 years ago, and one of the large passage chamber locations that we have on the west coast here, the person was up at midnight and watched as what she assumed were craft presented this grid-like pattern over the ground, and it was like they were mapping something out. She couldn't understand what was going on. She was watching this from down the valley. But yes, there is light phenomena that appears there, and also in other places connected with those locations.
So, Barry, the light phenomena, because it interests me as well. As you may know, I've been looking into this around East and North Yorkshire. The actual spheres of light, do you think there's an intelligence and awareness to them, or do you think it's just a byproduct of the Earth? What's your views on it?
Okay, there are two things going on that we need to understand. There's the phenomena that we create, as in man-made, as in built. And that technology exists. We see that technology even over in the US there on the west coast. We called it the Tic Tac. That's our technology. But when it's a black budget, you don't need to tell the pilot or the Navy that it's a black budget. It's the Air Force that runs that. They're the ones that are not talking about this. They're the ones not releasing the information. But the Navy are doing this. But the Navy was kitted out before those episodes happened to track high-speed targets. So the information is there. We just need to have a look at it and see what's what. But that technology belongs to us. Now, how we ended up with that technology, that's another question altogether. But the true phenomena, the true light phenomena, is part of the deception. And when we start looking at this and understanding that when the light phenomena appears, the creation of the light phenomena is to lock the conscious brain, the observer's cat. That's the hook to lock into the observer's brain. So we become mesmerized by this. We start wondering. We start, how is this happening, and all the rest. And we're not listening to our instinct. It cuts us off from our instinct, and our instinct is telling us, get the hell out of here.
In book one, I called it the intermind connection.
Yes.
You know, I'm not surprised you've said that, Barry, but I knew instantly when you were talking like that. You know, we've had rock anglers who've seen an unusual light out at sea. Well, one in particular, and this guy said, next thing, I'm looking at it focused. I'm thinking, what is it? It's not a planet. What? And he said, it's above me. The ground's lit up like a welder's torch kind of thing, and everything's just brilliant white, and terrified him, and it had gone. But there's loads of instances of that. So yeah, I mean, that could be a reason. I mean, but we do get more than a fair share of light phenomena here on the coast. But I'm sure you do in Ireland. You know, I think it's
the problem that we have is trying to understand that and trying to change your perspective on our outlook with it, and understand our own bodies and the signals that come from our body. And you see, at the beginning, there, you know, when we consider the likes of real estate agents, when they're selling the property, a lot of property is sold by feeling. People walk into the property, and could be 4 big walls. They walk in and they go, "Oh, this is nice. This is really
smell everything." It's an attack of the senses, isn't it?
It's all there. And what is that feeling? What is that? How do we break that down? And there are other times that we walk in and the same white walls. Oh no, I don't like this. No, I don't like this at all. And that is something that I wanted to delve into, and it was something I touched on in one of my books called The Influence, in which the book itself tapped into how these entities, how these energies interact with us on that biological level, on how they switch things on and how they switch things off, and how we can take back control for that. But there was a series of experiments that was done, and in the laboratory, and during that particular time, people were linked up to a computer that selected random images of babies and kitty cats and puppy dogs and everything else. And we like what we see. Now, as we're being monitored, our skin resistance lowers. So over the period of time, over the period of around half an hour, our skin resistance lowers because we like what we see. Now, when the computer randomly, not a person, so we're setting it outside of possibly picking up on the intent of a person within the room. I'm talking about the computer randomly selected an image of a car accident. Suddenly our skin resistance shot up. So our body was getting ready to move. It was pumping adrenaline in through our system. The hairs went up in the back of our necks and everything else. We didn't like what we saw. But as the experiment continued, what was starting to happen was that milliseconds before the computer selected the image,
anticipated,
starting to react. It was interpreting that it was coming. How are we doing that exactly? And that in itself brings us back to this aspect of the soul and the soul's ability to keep us safe. What we hypothesize within the book is that all psychic abilities are part of the soul. Now, when we end up in a situation where we go through a horrific experience, such as an alien abduction, and the people go through a horrific time, over the course of weeks following that, they start developing precognitive abilities, and very strange psychic abilities. And they say it's a gift. It's a gift from the little gray aliens. I challenge that. And I say, I don't think it is a gift. I think it is our soul stepping up to the mark so that we do not end up in the same situation again. Now, of course, that can happen. You know, we can end up in that situation.
Well, this is your show, but as a child, I had multiple experiences with, I don't know whether to call them aliens. I don't know what they were, Barry.
Mm-hmm.
But I know, even as a child, I was never ready when it happened.
Yeah.
No matter, and I wanted to be. I could spend months and months laid there every night, and I was always going to be ready. But I didn't even know it had happened until it had finished. If that makes sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And screen.
That's not to argue with what you've said.
No, not
Do you think then, jumping back to light phenomena, and I think Les will probably have a few more questions, but do you think that it's got the ability to not necessarily trigger? It doesn't know it's triggering chemicals and having this bodily reaction within us, but whatever it's doing in its way, it knows what effect it's going to have on its recipient.
It knows exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, but they're looking at it in a scientific way, like you're talking about, surely. Or do they?
Of course, yeah. What we tend to see, especially with nighttime attacks, for instance, when we cross over and look into the paranormal world of the same phenomena, where these things attack in the bedroom situation at night, they shut down communication from, I think it's the fourth vertebra in the neck, and we can continue to breathe. We can open our eyes, because those circuits are on a different circuit than the rest of the body, but they produce extreme amounts of fear, and there are reasons for that. Now, screen memory is another aspect as well that we have to consider. Screen memory is, of course, is something that our best psychiatric folks were coming up with, and this idea that although you were having this bad experience, it's covered by you having a dream of being in a circus, and seeing lions and everything else, and having a good time. But these screen memories can be broken down, and we can see what's behind them. And that can trigger the feelings of what was going on at that particular moment in time. And the same for a kid. Now, it's interesting that you bring up the child connection, because children are exceptionally tuned in to a lot of this. As adults, we tend to get, we're like a blunt instrument as we get older, but children are sharp. They can see the phenomena in its many multifacets, and but the one thing that switches off our ability for our body to react to the impulses of the soul is refined sugar. So when we consider that celebrations, for instance, that we have, like Halloween, and things like that, where we feed the children full of candy at times when they should be sharp, we blind the children. Presently today, we are blinding the children during these times where the doorway is open and these things find it easier to come through.
Brilliant. Really good. Les, have we more questions?
Yes, and thanks for those responses, guys. And fascinating. I'm just finding this wholly fascinating, Barry. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let's have a look then. David Sadler is asking, and welcome to the show, David. Does he believe in the changeling being a replacement?
No. Sadly, the changelings were kids that were unhealthy, and it was just one of those things. I feel. Now there are times whenever, we touched on her before, the Banshee, this being that comes through and predicts the death of someone in a group. Now, I've heard her call. I've had interaction with this being 3 times now in my life. And I wrote a book on it. In fact, I'm releasing the 3rd edition shortly. And what really annoyed me was that there were some American stories that were doing the rounds that said, if you hear the Banshee, you'll die. And she hasn't been heard since 1947. Again, both were wrong on multiple counts. And the Banshee, whenever I began to write the book, I began to see that she had a sympathetic side, where when she does cry and she announces that the death is coming, it's the people that surround the person that hear the cry. The person who is going to die doesn't hear it. So they're not affected by this. Their passing is easy. It's the other people around know that we heard the Banshee, we know the death is coming. So they prepare. And I have to say, when she cries, it's not like people would say, oh, it's just a fox or it's a hare caught in a trap. It's nothing like that. When she cries, your fight or flight instantly engages. There is an importance with this message that you have to focus on. Death is coming, prepare. And
sorry, I'm butting in here, but Les might know what I'm going to say next, because he's got his own little story that he thought he heard a Banshee. Am I wrong, Les?
Yeah, I did, and it was quite a simple story really, but I was out camping somewhere east of England, Boston, the town of Boston, which is at the mouth of the River Wash, and Banshee, 2 o'clock in the morning, a Banshee, typical sounding Banshee. I didn't attribute this sound to swans or anything that might have been out there, and it was absolutely human sounding, but in a screaming type of voice, if you understand that, Barry.
Mm-hmm.
And it frightened you to death. It frightened you to death. Sorry.
In the accounts and the experiences that I've had with her, although I've heard it that many times, I can't definitively describe it. It remains outside of my ability to do that. But yet, if I hear it, I recognize it straight away. And I find others are the same. It's an exceptionally difficult thing to pinpoint in description. And
you, how many times you heard this, Barry?
3 times now I've heard her. Yeah. And
not a trick question, this, but how can you be sure that's what you've heard? I know you've just said, because of what I've just told you, that there's nothing possible that can describe this thing as being anything else. And is it a phenomena that's predominantly in Ireland?
The Banshee is Irish. The Scottish have their own version. And I do know that there are versions in England, there are versions in Sweden, in Germany. So they all have their different versions, but for the Irish, of course, she's known as the Banshee, Woman of the Mounds.
But ultimately, it's probably the same type of phenomena, regardless of what culture, because as you know, they'll all look at these things slightly different, but we're probably dealing with the same thing, aren't we?
Same thing, but again, it's how it's interpreted. How do we see her? And her, even in Ireland here, her appearance will alter. But there's one sure thing: they do not like being spied on. Oh my God! One guy interviewed, and he's still going through therapy. And she appeared to him in Dublin, in the city, and he was out hanging clothes out in the backyard at night, and he seen her moving in the backyard, and he pulled the clothes across and was standing, because he couldn't see her properly. He was wondering, what on earth is this? And she saw him, and she made a beeline for him. He's still in therapy. So it was a very dramatic thing for it to happen. But the thing is, in legend, we're told that the Banshee, she will cry for people with Mech or O in their name. It's the old Celtic heritage. That's actually not quite true. And that is not the case, because she will cry for others. But her similarity to the UFO field is very, very similar because of the connection she has with the Fae. And this is something that I also put out there, in that is it possible that during the pregnancy that the mother had an experience? There was an alteration that was made with the child in the womb. Now, the mother, by the time that child is dying, the mother is long gone. So we can't find out, did the mother ever have an experience like what we would see within ufology, where they're doing all these tests and everything else. But what I find interesting is that even though she will come back and she will cry for maybe one or two members of the family, she may not appear again ever, or generations later she will make one other appearance. So it's not that she's coming through for the entire line, just particular ones. And I'm wondering, is there something in the blood that she's pulling back on? Is there something spiritually, or is there an aspect of the soul that she's drawing on, which belongs to them at the point of death?
Could be, Barry. I don't know, and no doubt you'll keep pursuing that. That line, yeah. Now then, the band. Let's just dwell on Banshee before we go to another question. I've got a few more, Les, have you? Are they ageless?
Yes, pretty much. I have tracked the same type of phenomena back into Samaria. So we're talking 3,500 BC. I've been able to track her back into, and that really is the start of writing. So after or before that.
So you say the Banshee as though it's a singular, but there must be more than one, or?
We do not know.
No.
We do not know. This idea of that the phenomena follows family lines. It was something that was brought forward in a discussion recently. It really got me thinking, because when we started looking at family lines, after about 8 generations back, we're so watered, filtered out. How could be? There are many people within that field, but what I'm seeing is that the connection here possibly is not at the end game, it's at the beginning of that tree. So before it disperses into all the different branches, it is at the beginning, because the majority of this phenomena, in all its multifacets, the majority of the phenomena can be conjured. There is an esoteric nature, an occult nature to the phenomena that was understood by our ancients. Now, if someone made an occult deal with their family line, that then would disperse through the branches of the tree. We may be looking not at multiple demonic possessions and all the rest that we're talking about, and within the paranormal and everything else. It may actually lie with one single entity that has access to thousands of family lines.
Right. Okay. And I want to ask him for some more questions, but you touched on the word conjuring. And do you think then that kind of practice could evoke any one aspect of the phenomena, any type of phenomena?
I believe it opens the door to the phenomena, in which it will make
the conduit that allows us.
Yes. Yeah. For instance, if we consider the skull experiment, it was an absolutely marvelous experiment that went on for around 5 years in up around your neck of the woods. And
just but before you go into that, you've more knowledge of this than me, and so I do want to listen talk about it. But I don't know if Mick Ganley's in our chat. He sometimes is, but if anybody sees him in chat, or ask a question, Mick, because I know that he's been involved in it. And it's somebody that we need to look for to get on one of these live streams at some point. He's just come back from Spain, so you'll know what I'm talking about, Barry. Right, carry on.
This idea that a particular entity appeared through this this conduit, the seance, the Victorian style seance in a basement in school. And many times that, you know, we were being told that darkness needed to prevail for these things to come through. This entity did come through and appear on video. It was a gray alien that appeared. Now, because of the video footage that it appeared on, it was the way that the hue worked and everything else, and else on it appeared blue, but it was a gray alien. Now, why is a gray alien coming through in a paranormal practice? Again, we're coming back to conjuring. We're coming back to this deception of what's coming through. And there was deception. There clearly was deception. You know, it took its toll. And you know, we were told that that blue, of course, and all of the spirit contactees that were working on the other side, all communication stopped. It was ceased. They would never be able to contact those beings or entity again. That was not the case. They did. So again, the deception was there. You're being told one thing and they go and do something else. And another thing I should point out in that, what was the phenomena that was being reported in school experiments was almost identical to what was happening in the Livermore laboratories in the United States to a bunch of scientists there. And this phenomena was appearing in broad daylight. It did not have to work in darkness. Another deception on their part.
Coming through as what we perceive as a grey alien.
It was coming through the phenomena. There were small UFOs that were appearing. There were creatures that were appearing. There was objects disappearing and appearing at ports. And all this was happening within the laboratory setting. In fact, a lot of the scientists thought they were going bloody crazy by the end of it. But it was the same phenomena, but it was happening in broad daylight. Not the darkness of the seance room where they tell us, oh, well, we have to work this way. Why? Is it because we will start to guess what's going on?
Their methods of contact are probably methods that I'm not advocating that people try this, but they're probably methods that anybody could use. I would have thought, you know, given the right mindset and application. But let's just jump to another question if Les has got any, Barry.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming, and I've got to thank everybody in your chat who sent the questions through. Let's have a look. We have a question from Teresa Walker, and it's going back to your island visits, I think, Barry, and she's asking how deep were the pits?
The pits were only a couple of inches deep.
Okay, so that's Teresa's question. Let's have a look. We've got. Is it right then?
Just before you fire into the question, so these pits are a couple of inches deep. So what's the circumference of them? I take it they're circular.
Oh, the circular, yeah.
Yeah.
And you could be looking at around 7 feet, 8 feet across.
Yeah, right.
You have enough space to put in a pop-up tent.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even see the scratchings of animals because you said there's no livestock on island.
There is nothing there, yeah.
Strange. Right, sorry, go on.
Yeah, Patricia Adams Wright is asking, has Barry ever been to Rathcrogan?
Rathcrogan, oh yeah, many times, yeah. We investigated that place once. It was a Celtic doorway to the other world. And at one particular time, they believed that it's another term for it is the Cave of the Cats. But they believed that there was this beast that entered onto the land around Halloween and decimated everything. But we were there, both Cormac and I, during our Legend Seeker stint. We went there, and we had our own experience. And I have to say that in this dark cave system, we had switched off our flashlights, and I was standing behind Cormac, and he was maybe 4 or 5 feet in front of me, and I started seeing this. I started seeing this thing in the cave system, and I thought, God, my eyes are playing tricks on me. And I never mentioned it to Cormac. I just, that's odd, and let it go at that. And over the course of the next few moments, Cormac and I switched positions. And so I went forward. But it was Cormac behind me said, "You're never going to understand this, but I'm seeing something weird." And he described the same thing that I was looking at. And the only way I can describe it, it looked, it gave me the impression, the way it moved and rotated. You know that movie Star Trek with Lieutenant Uhura standing on top of the sand dune with
Yeah.
the palm leaves? That's what it reminded me of. And but it was not by any means was it frightening in any nature whatsoever. It was actually a wonderful experience that we had in Rathcroghan. And I would definitely advise people if they're in Ireland to go. But make sure and bring a change of clothes, because it is very, very muddy down there.
Okay. Les?
Okay, yes, got a few more questions. And thanks for that question, Patricia. Warren Hardcastle is asking, does Barry feel there is a link between the mound builders in Ireland, USA, and giants?
I have a thing with giants. I know I'm probably going to get sliced and diced for this. I did a video there of Irish giants just before our first lockdown 2 years ago, and I travelled the length and breadth of Ireland looking at the Irish giants. No, they are a physical thing. There was a problem within the DNA strand that allowed these people to grow massively. Now, am I looking at the same thing in other places? I do not know. The mound builders themselves are the same people. They're the same people globally. So where we see in Estonia, in Northern Europe, we have mounds there that, again, we have the serpentine connection there on those islands as well. We've got them in Norway. We've got them throughout Europe, in England, Ireland, and we've got them in the US. So they're all over the place. Central America also have their connection. Teotihuacan is a perfect example of this serpentine culture, and the Serpent King, which was another person who was exceptionally crafty at setting up a very, very successful city establishment within Central America. But the problem when we started to see the serpentine worship start to fall was with sacrifice. And that is something that we had to face through our investigations, because a lot of the phenomena that we tended to see with the likes of the UFOs, with poltergeists, with abductions, mutilations, disappearances, we were seeing distinct connections with magnetic anomalies across the world.
That will make, you know, we were just going to jump from questions to that's what I was going to ask you about. So we'll go there. Barry, there's certain, just need to say this, I think even our listeners will know, we got punished for using, we've been saying animal deaths.
Animal deaths.
Yeah, but we got punished a few weeks ago for using that word of all things.
Really? Who punished you?
Well, YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not you, my friend. I mean, I've said it lots of times, but it will come back to bite us on the backside, should we say? So
okay. Yeah. Well, then the code word is animal deaths.
Yes.
But what we saw is that the original phenomena we tend to see happen more so in the positive magnetic anomalies. Now, I'm going to show you a photograph here from Google Earth, in which we can see the positive magnetic anomaly, which is the red one.
Yeah.
And then you have the blue one, which is the negative magnetic anomaly. Now, the negative magnetic anomaly initially, I was seeing some interesting data coming from it, but my attention was focused on the positive magnetic anomaly. and what was coming through there. The disappearances of people, of course, was another thing. Our work crossed over neatly into the work of David Paulides in the US, who had wrote Missing 411. And a lot of his people were disappearing in positive magnetic anomalies, the batches of people. And again, we were seeing the animal deaths and everything else happening within those areas.
Yeah.
But there was something odd that appeared in the research early on, and initially I threw it away for the time being. I set it out of the way, because I really didn't know what to think about it, because in the negative magnetic anomalies, I was seeing 70% of the world's top suicide locations appeared in these places. And I thought, all right, that can't be by chance, but there's maybe something else going on there. And I again, I shelved it for the time being. But then I started looking at this aspect of us and how we are communicating with these things beyond the veil, and in particular, certain organizations that were continuing the research into these places, into these beings that were coming through. And I'll give you an example. I have on file here documentation from the Douglas Aeronautics Company, who in 1965 were contacting aliens, same phenomena, different mask. They were contacting aliens, trying to get information on advanced engine design. Now, they were using a Ouija board. Now, the documentation is there. This is not, it's Heinz, and it's maybe it's a conspiracy.
There's a paper trail for this.
There is actually paperwork here supporting that. So we do see that there were establishments were keen on keeping up with this idea of communing with the other side. And when we go back and we start looking at a lot of the ancient sites, we find sacrifice was connected to those as well. So there seemed to be a heritage of blood loss at these locations. And there were, from a Greek perspective, there were two different types of entity that were known, and one of them was very, what we would identify today as Pan, the old pagan god of the wilderness. So he would appear, or the likeness of this particular entity would appear in these locations. But the other one that I was fascinated by were simply known as the Word.
The Word.
The Word. So these priests and these kings were coming to the oracle, and they were getting information from the other side on how to rule us. And this has been going on for thousands of years. But looking now at this aspect of the sacrifice and the blood worship, I started delving into it a little bit more whenever I started seeing this connection with the suicide, the way it seems to pull people into these places, and the connection with their ancestors and these locations with suicide. Sacrifice. But there was also, when we go back and we look at the likes of World War I, for instance, Europe, the majority of Europe is one huge negative magnetic anomaly. So during World War I, there were 21 million lives who were lost. Now, when we put this into perspective, that's 252 million pints of blood. And we wonder, I can just imagine your listeners going, where the hell is he going with this? But in World War II, we lost 25 million people in Europe alone, which is just over 300 million pints of blood. Something on this land was demanding its quart. And when we look at weapons manufacturing and weapons deployment, weapons storage facilities, we have to understand that there's a huge amount of money to be made of this: power, money, and wealth. And $400 billion was being made in 2017. Now, of course, we have Russia on the other side there. That's God knows how much weaponry they're going to be making out of this now. But 75% of the world's top weapons manufacturing, testing, and procurement places are in negative magnetic anomalies.
It's interesting, Barry. And when you touch on the fact that of all the, I forgot the number of pints of blood that what's the symbolism? Because the blood is not getting consumed.
No.
So why?
It was also an offering.
That's that. Yeah.
So when we consider that and understand the esoteric value to that, it is massive, because when you deal with these things on the other side, there was always a price, especially to those in power. There was always a price, and that price, unfortunately, is
great loss. Great loss.
Great loss. And when we look at places such as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Edwards Air Force Base, Los Alamos Laboratories, they're all in negative magnetic anomalies. In fact, we see some of the places were actually shut down within positive magnetic anomalies and opened again in a negative one. So something, and I'm not going to say that we've got people contacting things beyond in the other world. We do have a document trail to show that this did happen. Yep. Does it happen now? I don't know. But it is interesting that this is something we should examine and look at further.
So if we jump from that, we can stay with it if you like, but in the past you've done a lot of ghost, poltergeist type investigating. Have you any cases that you want to tell us about that have been particularly interesting?
There was a case that I was working on, in fact, and it was at Dracula's Castle. I just spoke about this recently, and when it was the night before we went to Dracula's Castle in Romania, it was a place called Quandary. And I do remember the steps distinctly, 1,642 steps to get up to this blasted castle. But the night before that happened, I had this visionary experience in which this woman came to me on the back of 2 lions. And I thought, who is this? And why is she so annoyed? And that's being pretty conservative. She was very annoyed that I was going to be at the castle. Now, I shrugged it off. I woke up in a sweat and I shrugged it off and I says, whatever the hell that was about, I don't know. And we ended up going to the castle and we tried our damnedest to make contact with Dracula, with Vlad Tepes. Nothing did we get. But the moment I switched my questioning to this woman, there was one reply came back on the EVP. Class A, leave now. That was it. Now, years went by. I had no idea who this was. And it often puzzled me to know, well, what was she doing there? What was this all about? And it turned out that with the work that I was doing over the past year or so with Mesopotamia, it turns out that she was a goddess of war. Astarte was a goddess of war. She has another name as well, of course. So this particular person this god was there at that site. Why? It made no sense. Why was a Babylonian god at Dracula's castle, the goddess of war? but the insignia of the Order of the Dragon is also a Babylonian symbol.
Right.
And so it would indicate that there possibly was some type of Babylonian ancient witchcraft that was being performed and recognized within Vlad's line. And she was definitely there. So you know, it was an odd one, all right.
So you went to the castle to try and establish some kind of contact
with Vlad. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are your views then on? That's a question I've never asked anybody on vampirism.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is a problem with vampirism, especially when we consider the addiction to adenosine triphosphate. There is a problem there. The early vampire depictions of people growing nails and all the rest, that has already been explained away, you know, and the hair continuing to grow and then being plump and red and you know, within the coffin and stuff like that. But there is something else that we lost when we looked at the whole vampire mythology, and that was the connection to ATP, and this addiction that it can cause, which is much more potent than crystal meth or crack cocaine. So and that in itself is more readily available within the internal organs of us. And when we look at the early depictions and stories of the vampire, they ate the internal organs. They didn't go for the neck, so you know, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one, all right.
Right, jumping from that then, Les will have a few questions in a bit, I expect. But if you could experience, because you've experienced loads of different aspects of the phenomena, but if you were to want to experience just one part of, we'll call it any genre of it, what would it be?
Oh, there's an underground bunker in Germany that was built during World War II to fine-tune their advanced weaponry. That's a place I would like to get into.
Yeah, you'd like to?
Yeah, I would like to, because I would like to establish what they were communicating with.
I take it it's restricted access, is it?
I have no idea.
All right.
I've been in Germany many times, but I've never been to that place. And I don't know how they may consider my approach. I don't know, but I would really like to see if we could make contact with something. I would say when we were in Wolfschanze, which is over in Poland, it was Adolf Hitler's forward command post. That was the only time that I've ever come close to what I could say was Adolf Hitler. And I've been to Argentina chasing him, all the stories and everything else. Nothing was ever there. But there, yeah, there was something there. Yeah. That place that was one of those places that creeped me out as well.
Do you think it's more the fact that there's an imprint of him and a history of him than him actually being there, Barry?
No, because we were in his bunker, we primed the atmosphere.
Okay.
We were using a phenomenon known as the Singapore theory, where we used common things that he would have identified with at the time. Now, Hitler he didn't sleep well at night. So he was up most of the night, and he brought in people from all over the base, listening to Wagner and all the rest. But for me to make that work, I had to tell the crew, I need you to be there, 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 and there. And I told Paul, that who I was working with at the time, I said, I need you to bring this piece of equipment, this, and this. Don't ask why. I'll tell you where to put it up and when to set it. That's it. Because I couldn't verbalize what I wanted to do. The moment I put that out, it won't happen.
Yeah, I know exactly what. Yeah,
and to keep it in here.
and do you sometimes think, Barry? You're just saying you keep it in there. Do you sometimes? This is going to sound stupid, but do you sometimes try not to even? How do you not think of it and not think of it? It's but you know what I'm saying, don't you?
Yeah, because as a man, we have got the empty box in here. We can open the empty box and stare into it. That's our talent, and that's sometimes what I have to do. I stare into the empty box, knowing what I'm about to go into. I can't concentrate on it because they pick up on it.
Yeah, because I've noted, you know, you if you're focused on it and you're wanting it to happen, very rarely does it happen.
That's
It's
true.
when you take your mind off it, it happens.
Yeah,
I don't mean in all instances, but
yeah. No, I get where you're coming from, and I also found as well that when the phenomena is going really, really well, and something happens that makes me wait a minute, something's not quite right here.
As soon as you start thinking about it, it's gone.
It's gone. It flees. Game's up. We're out of here. Now, if something was for our betterment and something was trying to communicate for our positive, what difference would that make? Why do they scarper when they're caught? That is what scares me the most.
Yeah, something to hide. Right, just general public, the people who aren't as involved in subjects as you, me, Les, our listeners. How do we go about break? Because some of the things you've talked about tonight, it'd be sort of radical to a lot of people, wouldn't it? You know, how do we go about breaking the stigma that's attached to this? Or don't we? Do we just do what we're doing?
I think I'm not one. There was a person read the book down in New Zealand, and he said, "So does that mean that I should stay away from everything?" And that's not what the book was designed to do. It was designed to make you aware that there is a deception behind the veil, and to be aware of that. So I don't say stop dealing with it. I'm still there. I'm still doing what I do, but I'm more careful. So that works for me, and that's all I ask out of this is to be more careful. And a lot of people get into this for S's and giggles. I can't swear. S's and giggles. People are in it for, and that can cause unsurmountable trouble. Because although nothing may happen that night, the fact that they have left that door open, it can happen 2 weeks down the line. It can happen 6 months down the line, 6 years down the line. Some other person's moved into the property. They know nothing of the history, and suddenly they're wondering what is going on here.
Yeah,
because they're just not careful enough.
And the new occupants, just hypothetically, could have somebody, teenagers in the property that have just the right ingredients to activate what's being left open.
Yeah.
But right then, do you ever feel threatened or harassed? I mean, no.
Yes.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't just mean by the phenomena. I mean, have you been threatened or warned off by people?
Oh, yeah. There's been a few cases now that I was involved with in regards murder, and we were getting too close, and there was a bit of a cover-up going on. So we said, well, we can't go any further with this. But I think folks need to be aware going into this that intent is a big thing, and the intent is part of the conjuring. It's part of the esoteric aspect of the investigation, because if this was a voice recorder, the very fact that we have the intent and we say, is there anyone there, we have just opened the door to allow this to come through. Now, the problem is it's a small door because there's only one intent behind it. But when you've got the likes of a Ouija board where there's 4 people around it, now you've multiplied that intent by 4. And as you know, you've probably heard the stories that Ouija boards are grand for most of the time, but there are times when give it enough length of rope, it will turn on itself, and you will start to see a nature coming through it which we don't enjoy anymore. and that is the deception. We need to be very, very careful about what we're dealing with. We need to be sure of what we're dealing with. Even in the big book, it says, test the spirit that it is of God. And never a truer line was said.
And the Ouija board, I mean, I've not really had much experience with them, Barry, but the board itself, this is my views on it,
Yeah.
and it sounds like you've got a lot of knowledge on this, but to me, the board itself has got no magical properties. It's the people pouring their energy, for want of a better word, into it, and focusing on the darkest element of the phenomena.
It is an esoteric practice. It's an occult practice that we do, and there's no escaping it. Call it for whatever you want. It's an esoteric practice.
Okay.
And that's something we need to be careful of. And even the idea of sitting in circle and at a location and wanting to see lights in the sky is an esoteric practice.
Yeah.
There's no escaping that. And we can create, we can conjure, and these things can come through. But for a lot of the time, what we see as that light in the sky, they're already on the ground.
Mm. And that is that what you were hinting at earlier, that the light is diverting our focus away from what's really happening?
Yes,
Yeah.
they're already on the ground. We need to be very aware of that, and that's where our bodies will tell us those signals. We need to listen to that ability, that innate ability that we have to listen to those signals. Well,
do you know? I'm going to ask Les if we have any questions. If we haven't, I want to touch on cryptids or whatever you want to talk about. But it looks like if we've got some questions, let's get them fired at Barry.
Okay, yes, some questions. Yeah, quite a lot of questions, and I'm going to apologise now in advance because I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I apologise if I don't get through all the questions tonight, people. So just bear with me. Curious Kitty is asking, "Hi Barry, when you was talking earlier about seeing cryptids and other creatures around the passage chambers, Barry, is there any rock art depicting cryptids?"
Yes. In fact, there is one. We're going to be talking about cryptids in a little moment, but there was one that I was at in California, and there's rock art that depicts many different creatures. And I spoke to the Native Americans there because this was a place that Bigfoot used and came through. And I looked at these other creatures, and I could see that there was things that I could recognize from my times here on the island. And I said, "What are these other things?" And they said, "It's not only Bigfoot that uses the doorway."
Yeah, and I've got another question from. Let's have a look. Oh, Space Cadet Lottie is asking, has Barry ever used dowsing rods at these ancient sites?
Yes. Now, I don't get lost. A lot of people may get lost in the fact that the dowsing rods themselves are magical, but they're not. The dowsing rods are simply an extension of us. And in fact, what I see the dowsing rods are an extension of our soul, which I call our shadow. So it's our shadow that is communicating through that and makes the small alterations within the hands and through the body to signal, okay, we're in the right direction, we're going in the right place, here's what you're looking for, and all of that. I don't see the rods themselves as being magical. It's just an extension of our own shadow's ability.
Okay, what a great.
I've got another question, Paul.
I'm happy to just fire with questions, because I think if people have taken time to write them, then as long as you don't mind, Barry, let's just
that's a good question, that Space Cadet Lottie. And another one from Space Cadet is asking, have there been any elongated skulls found anywhere in Ireland?
I'm not aware of any of those, no. I do have an associate in Egypt, and there have been talk there recently that there was an underground city was discovered in the desert, and there was skulls found, but they're not expecting the skulls to stay there for any length of time. Yeah.
Moved by the authorities, I take it. You mean? Yeah.
Simon Riley is asking, Barry, is there such a thing as a black banshee with red eyes?
No, the black banshee, or not the black banshee. This idea of a black creature with red eyes is certainly something that stems a lot from the English lore, especially the likes of the black dog.
Yeah, the black sheep.
Now the thing is about the black dog, and I've thought about this. I haven't had any experiences with the black dog myself, but I've thought about this from the ancient times. Dogs were our companion. And I do wonder to myself if the dogs themselves, if this energy of the dog was left to guard the place of the doorway. So if we start to stray too close, the dog comes forward to push us off, to get us away from that particular area. I wonder, is it there for our protection and we're misinterpreting possibly what our ancestors have done?
Okay.
Steve Trees is asking, is there a Banshee recording?
There are several recordings, I'm led to believe. I do have my own recording, but it stays on file.
Now that's interesting, that, Barry. I'm assuming that you feel like you couldn't play it.
Yeah.
And is that out of fear?
No, I believe that was a gift for me.
Ah, right.
And that's where I leave it.
So, just to extend it a little bit further, then just kind of push you on it. So, if you played it, what do you believe would happen?
Probably nothing.
Ah, fair enough.
Okay. Yeah, David Sadler is asking, does Barry believe the Irish crocodile is a cryptid?
I don't know what the Irish crocodile is. We do have a thing which in our history, I suppose, could be construed possibly as that. It was called a pisht. And that in itself was a I think in England you called it the worm. And in Ireland, that's what we called it. And we tended to have those down the west coast in particular.
And you know, we've got legendary stories of them not far away from where we're doing documentary Wolflands on Filing Dales Moor, you know. And yes, it's interesting, isn't it? You know. Right, on Les.
Yeah, Patricia Adams writes. Thanks for the question, Patricia. Does Barry still use his scientific approach as he did on GHI?
What was her name again? Patricia, did you say?
Patricia,
Patricia Adams Wright.
Patricia, I have to say that for the camera, we had to stick to this idea of science. But I'm going to let you into a secret. This idea of science was no more scientific than a fly crawling up a wall. And I did use my innate abilities behind the camera because they didn't want to address that on camera. And by using that, I was able to set the equipment up where I knew we would have the better success. So it was a combination of two things there. But they didn't tend to like the idea of the sensitives and things like that. But coming from an island of Celts, it's something that I embrace and something that I use daily.
Yeah, very good.
Stephen O'Neill is asking, hi guys, brilliant show. I come from Strabane in Northern Ireland, and I would like to ask Barry if he knew anything about the place called Shantisbury. It's a local, well-known folklore story in the area.
I can't say I know it. There are hundreds of thousands of stories across the island. So I'll actually look into it. I'm going to write it down.
Well, do you want him to email you?
Yeah, that'll be
information about it.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. That might be something that could go into the next generation of legend seekers.
Steve Mira is asking,
Oh, not him.
I guess you know Steve, yeah. Ask Barry why we ended up in the desert mountains of Palm Springs.
When we were in California, Steve and I were attending a lecture. We were performing a lecture, and we knew that there was a lot of people there, big names within the ufological field, and some in particular were out the back of the hotel forming circle to commune with whatever they were pulling through. A lot of it, I have to say, was airplanes and satellites. But this idea of forming circle, again, is another esoteric practice. But Steve and I were already aware that the place that we needed to be was 7 miles beyond the hotel and into the high desert. Now, when we went there, we took, I think it was 3 carloads of people that went with us. And my own wife was with me, but she missed everything because, strangely enough, she started to take a migraine headache, which made her ill, and she had to lie on the back of the truck. She couldn't see or anything, so she was cut out of this. And we all arrived, and we were standing there, and some of the group were, I have to say, were like Asian tourists with the cameras ready to go. And this phenomena hates cameras, and I understand the reasons why, because when you're linking with someone through the conscious brain, you can manipulate that. You can't manipulate the camera. The camera reports what's actually there. So they don't like cameras. So I asked the folks there, could you please put the cameras away? And when the last camera was put away, the hair stood up in the back of my neck, and I said, okay, they're here now. And with the moment that was said, boom, 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 this thing appeared over the top of us. And an exceptionally bright light, piercing like a welder's arc above our heads. Boom, 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 boom. And this went on for about 90 seconds. And but I was listening to the instinct, and it was telling me, get everybody out of here. And so the moment it was over, I said to everyone, back into the van, we're leaving. And there was some protest about wanting to leave, because some were saying, we've often heard tell of this, but we'd never actually seen it.
We've engaged with phenomena, and now you want us to go.
Now you want us to go. That can't happen. It says it has to happen, because I was aware that they were already on the ground. These things weren't up there; they were on the ground, and they were in that valley that we were in. And we started to leave, and the first 2 trucks, they headed off, and I stopped because I was summoned to stop. And I waited quietly with the engine running, and they made it quite clear that they were not there for me. They were there for the people in the van. And I said, sorry, that ain't happening. And we left. Now, I made it quite clear. I spoke to the people in the van, and I said, now, tell me what was happening while you were watching. And they said, oh, it was amazing, all the lights and everything else. And how did you feel? Excited. It was wonderful. And I said, did the hair go up in the back of your neck? Yes, it did. And was your heart racing? Yes. It was fantastic. I said, that's your adrenaline releasing. Your fight or flight had engaged at that point. Your shadow had engaged the body. It was telling you, leave now, because it picked up on the nature of the phenomena. And they chose to ignore it because they were fascinated by the conscious connection. But because I did that, and I came back home again after that, I was cut from all connection to all the phenomena for over 6 months. I was cut off.
You've gone full circle there, Barry, because you touched on that at the beginning, didn't you? So I'm glad we haven't ended, but I'm glad you're just about there with it. With that, So thanks for the question, Steve. Is there any more to add to that?
No, that was it. It was a remarkable phenomenon. But using the satellites to highlight the magnetic anomalies, we could see the areas that we were more likely to have a better quality of contact in. Sorry.
Excellent, excellent. And as you might not know, but you probably do, that we have a magnetic anomaly just off Bempton.
Yes.
You know, and which is interesting. And even some of the land is named, it's got interesting names. And I don't mean like Wolf Howe and things like that. It's a kind of thing that I've not wrote about. I haven't wrote the names just to protect the identity of the farms and what have you.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to that, if you don't mind. And in that particular area, out into the ocean or out into the sea, the North Sea there, did Doggerland?
Very close, very close. Yeah, the magnetic anomaly. Funnily enough, we've been doing it today on a map. Myself and Les.
Yeah.
Well, Les has been putting it on a map in his software, but it's 18 nautical miles off Bempton, between Bempton and Flamborough. And what's interesting, it's very close to a prime meridian line as well. So
right.
I think that's something that needs looking at as regards the magnetic anomalies. The meridian lines, and have we got them close to the anomalies? Have you looked at that?
Yes, I have, but I'm just wondering from your perspective. I'm wondering, under the ocean, is there something there that was left from that time in regarding a stone structure?
Could be. We do have. I know Les might want to get another question in, but we do have what's called the Silver Pit crater, which is one of the largest impact craters in the world, just off there as well.
Oh,
but anyway, fire away, Les. Sorry, Barry, because we've got about 4 minutes left, and we need to let you tell us where people can find your work as well, because that's important.
Yeah, I'll just get another question in, and then we just might be able to squeeze on other things, a bit of housekeeping later on. Curious Kitty is asking, and I'll just weave in a question here from myself, actually. You talked about the negative magnetism and your research to do with suicides, Barry. My question is the South Wales suicides, do you think that's linked to any of this negative magnetism?
I haven't looked at those. What I was looking at was the world's top suicide locations. I haven't looked at those ones specifically.
And Curious Kitty was asking how much of the world has a negative magnetism, in your opinion, Barry?
We tend to find it's pretty much well dispersed north and south of the hemisphere, but we tend to find bigger magnetic anomalies in the southern hemisphere.
Right. So I am really stuck for time, guys, and just tell everybody, Barry, where they can find you. We've probably got in the show notes in the description of today's show, but please tell people where they can find you.
They can find me on Facebook, and my website is charmstealer.com. But if they would fancy grabbing their hands on this wonderful book, The Deceptions of Gods and Men, they can find it on Amazon.
Excellent. And
Paul, if you want to, yeah.
Well, I think everybody knows where they can get my books, truthproof.uk, and you'll find Kindle books on Amazon. So that's me done with that. Barry, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thoroughly enjoyed.
And yeah, and hopefully, because I've got a pile of questions here that I ain't even bothered asking. So would you come back?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you. I'll leave it to Les.
Yeah, well, the ice creams are nice, aren't they, Barry? That's the thing. And now some people that do have a little jab about this, because we sometimes have an ice cream break. We probably told you that earlier on in the week, and it's a toilet break, but we say we're going for choc ices.
No, you do.
No, I do, yeah. But I've got to say thank you, Barry, for being on today's show, and Paul, thanks for letting me produce the show today.
No, excellent. Thank you very much. And all our listeners and contributors, brilliant. Thank you very much for the questions. Okay, on that note, I'm out.
Okay, right. As you heard there, guys, Barry's been a great guest, and he also put himself forward to coming on again. So, how's that? That must be a treat. We've got through most of the questions, and I've got to say thank you for the questions. Thank you for the super chat. And thank you for Deborah for doing the moderating tonight. You've all been great tonight. Thanks for all the support, guys. now with a good following wind, and if we and the world affairs go the right way, let's hope we're here next week. So we'll see you then. Bye.